If you're not achieving the goals that you want to achieve, it could be that the problem is with your mindset. Now, I love creating systems, but sometimes you have to just force yourself to get things done. So I'm going to share a bunch of books with you, 7 books in total, that can help you overcome a weak mindset. So the first book is called Iron Cowboy. It's written by someone named James Lawrence, who has completed 50 Ironman triathlons in 50 states in 50 days. So an Ironman triathlon is a 2.5 mile swim, 110 mile bike, and a 26.2 mile run. Even just to do one of these makes you amazing. This guy did 50 of them in 50 states in 50 days. You can imagine all the traveling he has to do, plus these things take like between 9 and 16 hours to do. So he's spending most of the day on the road actually exercising. It's kind of insane. So some of the lessons I took away from hearing his story is just the value of mental resilience. Like, he basically had to use his mind, and he talks about this in the book, had to use his mind to overcome sort of physical and mental challenges. There was just a lot of kind of logistics problems and, little things that caused a big issue, right? Blisters, etc. And he just really focused on positive self-talk to get through those moments. And he would basically set small achievable goals and celebrate progress to get him moving forward step by step every single day for those 50 days. Second thing is preparation. So he did a bunch of prep work ahead of time. He did a bunch of planning, and when things went well, it was like easy for him. When things did not go well, it was like a nightmare. You put the wrong socks on and then you get blisters, and those blisters will last for 5 days if you're doing that much time on the road. And so just the value of preparation. Then the last is just having support, right? You can't do something like this alone, or at least, no one's ever done this before. So maybe he can try it again and do it alone, but the community that he had supporting him, what he would do was he had people that went with him that supported him, doctors and things like that to make sure that he didn't die. But also he was posting on Facebook every day, and people would come out and run a triathlon with him, and they'd tell him the story, and it just encouraged him to keep going. So this book is extremely inspiring. And the best part is he did the thing so that you don't have to do it, because I think even doing a single Ironman would be kind of insane, but doing 50 of them in 50 days, I'm out. So it's awesome to just read his story. Second book is called The Way of the Superior Man, and it's by David Deida. This book was a little controversial because it talks a lot about men and women, or masculine and feminine energy. And so when I started it, I was like, I don't really know, but it's actually a great book. A couple of things I took away from this book is, number one, live with purpose. So if you can find your purpose, then it makes everything else easier. And he talks about that a purpose is actually more important than, any hobbies that you have or relationships, whatever. Like, you have to figure out a reason to live. And if you don't have a reason to live, your goal is to find that reason. And so it's really about core values, finding your passions, and making them the center of your life. Like, don't let anybody take that stuff away from you. That's really inspiring, especially if you're finding that you're being pushed around by a whole bunch of other people. Second lesson is the masculine and feminine energy. I just love this concept. And initially it didn't make sense to me, but if you can kind of separate men and women from masculine and feminine, he says that there are men with feminine energy and women with masculine energy. And the idea is to embrace the masculine energy within you when you're trying to achieve things. Basically, creating awareness around this allows you to navigate the world in a different way. If you ignore it, then it's going to affect you and you're not sure why. He basically says, like, there always needs to be a balance between sort of the masculine and feminine. You can't just be hard charging all the time. You also can't be, afraid of everything all the time, or just completely emotional all the time. There's a balance at all times in life. So I thought that was really interesting. The last is to just be present and authentic. And this is with your relationships, it's with yourself. He talks a lot about mindfulness and staying present and fully engaged in the moment, and talks about that as really a key to a happy life. And so it was an inspiring book, even though it was a little controversial. So I highly recommend that one. The third book is called Grit, and it is The Power of Passion and Perseverance by a Stanford professor named Angela Duckworth. She studied a bunch of military, etc., and found out what makes people succeed. Why do some people get through Navy SEAL training or in some of these hard trainings, and other people don't. This book has one of my favorite concepts, which is passion and perseverance over talent. And she has this equation, which basically is talent times effort equals skill, and then skill times effort equals achievement. And so what she's saying is that effort counts twice. Like, you can have all of the talent, right? Maybe you're 7 feet tall and you have coordination. You have the talent to be a good basketball player, but unless you put in effort, you won't develop the skills to be a good basketball player. And then once you have the skills, you have to put more effort in to actually win the game or win a championship. And so I just love this concept so much that I actually have a shirt that says effort counts twice, effort squared. So it's one of my favorite concepts because it just gives you motivation to just keep showing up. Another concept from this, so the second lesson from this book, is the power of practice and deliberate practice. Basically making sure that when you're focusing on something, when you're practicing something, you're doing it deliberately. So if I practice the guitar's back there, then not just mindlessly doing it, but actually practicing a song, getting feedback, setting specific measurable goals. Like, I make progress a lot faster when my practice is deliberate. And then the last is cultivating a culture of grit. So I apply this more to my kids. It's like, I tell them when things get hard, you keep trying. And when they sign up for something, we make them see it through until, let's say they signed up for a 6-week, trumpet lessons or whatever. We make them see it through for those 6 weeks. They can change their mind after that, but once they're in, they're in. And creating that culture is really important in terms of, having grit. I just love this book because it highlights the importance of like sustained effort and practice and an environment that's supportive. So it's really good. The next book is called Relentless: From Good to Great to Unstoppable. This is written by Tim Grover, who was the basically mindset coach for Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. I mean, this book is incredible. Like, you want to be fired up, either read this book or listen to it, because even just the way that he talks, this guy's just all business. Yeah, let's go. So the thing that's great about this is the cleaner mentality. So he had a couple of different categories that he categorized people into, which was coolers, closers, and cleaners. So coolers are just the people who show up and get paid. The closer can sometimes, win a game or two, but the cleaner are the highest achievers. They're the ones who don't just want to win, but want to dominate. And they're motivated internally and can perform at the highest level no matter what happens. And I think there are areas of all of our lives where we are the cooler, where we're just showing up and getting a paycheck. We're a closer, where we can sometimes achieve things. And then some things that we can just dominate. I mean, you even think about video games you used to play when you were a kid. It's like, they're games that you know so well that you just dominate those games. And it feels amazing because you're just in there, you've put the work in, and you know that you can hit that high standard every time you do it. So I love that concept. Second thing I took away from this is kind of trusting your instincts. A lot of times we ignore our instincts because of what other people say or what other people do around us. You want to develop confidence in this by showing up, doing the things that you're supposed to do on a daily basis, and cultivating self-awareness, like making decisions that you think are going to take you forward and sticking with them. The last lesson from this book is that everyone has a dark side, and it's the part of you that flips over the Monopoly table when you're about to lose, or just gets super angry. I see it in my kids all the time, and I see it in myself sometimes. When people really tick me off, that's when the dark side starts to come out. And the thing is, people are so afraid of this dark side, but sometimes it's the thing that motivates you to do things. In fact, people are more motivated not to lose than they are to win. And so that's one of the things he talks about, is a lot of the best characteristics of Kobe and Michael is that they did not want to lose. They hated losing more than they liked winning. So just really enjoyed that book, and I would recommend you read that to get through tough times and develop a better mindset. The next book is called Cant Hurt Me. You've heard of this one, probably. This is David Goggins. And it's just a memoir of his life, and just how crappy his life was when he grew up. This guy basically went through Navy SEAL training 4 or 5 times, something like that, 3 or 4 times. He also went through Army Ranger School. He went through a whole bunch of other things, been through all the toughest like military training that the United States has to offer. He's also set records on number of pull-ups. He's done crazy things like, doing Ironman triathlons and ultra marathons and things like that. And he came from a background where he was not treated well, and he was really overweight. And it's just him telling his story of like how he overcame that. So some of the takeaways from this, the 40% rule. I mean, this guy, when you hear him talk, he's just inspiring. You can watch him on Instagram or whatever. The 40% rule, when you think you're done, you're only at 40% of your potential. So I found this to be true when I've done the marathon or a couple of races. It's like you get to a point where you don't want to move forward and you keep moving forward. And it turns out that you can actually finish that race and be fine. And at the end you suffer, but you can push beyond whatever perceived limits you have. And I've just found this time and time again. No matter how hard things get, you can always get more. The accountability mirror is something he talks about, which is radical accountability and how it's essential for personal growth and transformation. So this is like everything is my fault, basically. This is something I learned running a business, is that everything is my fault. And if I take responsibility for everything, then it feels like things are in my control and I can influence the outcome. If it's my fault, then I get to decide what I do next. In fact, I was in a car crash recently that was my fault, and I needed a new car. And basically by the end of the week, I had sorted out that car, sorted out the other person. They weren't hurt or anything, but I got their car fixed and I got myself a new car and I just moved on. It was like not a big issue because I just took 100% accountability for it. And if it's my fault, then I'm just gonna keep going. I couldn't blame my crappy car with its bald tires and weak brakes. I just focused on moving forward. The last lesson from this book is callousing the mind, which is kind of an interesting idea, but it's basically like, here's how you develop mental toughness. Do really hard things. I've done a lot of hard things in my life, and what happens is when you do enough hard things, something comes up that other people might think is hard, and you're just thinking, yeah, this is not a big deal. When you've run a business for 15 years in 2 different continents, a lot of bad stuff happens. And you just learn to deal with it and you move on. And now the things that used to be life-changingly bad are just normal. And so, yeah, this book is great for building a great mindset. The next book is also kind of a memoir. It's called The 50th Law by 50 Cent and Robert Greene. So Robert Greene wrote The 48 Laws of Power, and 50 Cent basically read that book really early on because it's a very popular book in prison, and this guy was in prison, used some of that knowledge and used some of those principles to be extremely successful. I mean, the guy is worth $500 million and has just nonstop been successful. So some lessons that I took away from this book. I mean, it's actually a great book. If you've read The 48 Laws of Power, you'll love this one, but it's also kind of a memoir and a biography of 50 Cent. So some lessons I took away. Number 1, embrace fearlessness. This guy is really fearless. I mean, he was shot 9 times. He used to deal drugs and he was shot, and he was, in prison and all these other things. And there's just nothing that he sees on a daily basis doing business stuff that scares him. And so he just looks for fears and confronts them directly. And I think this is one of the keys to living life, is like you have to find a way to deal with fears. So the second lesson is facing reality, which is seeing the world as it is rather than what you want it to be. And this is the second time I've heard this. There was another book called It Takes What It Takes by Trevor Moawad, where he talks a lot about this. And the idea is just, if you were just focused on positive thinking and you were down, 50 points at halftime, you're not really embracing reality. So sometimes you just have to embrace reality and the underlying truths and make decisions based on practical considerations rather than wishful thinking. I think this is a really good lesson because it doesn't mean that you are going to the negative, but just embracing neutral, like what is neutral, so that you can move forward from that. Then the last lesson from the 50th Law is self-reliance. I mean, 50 Cent, he had a team, and he's had people he's worked with along the way, but he really just relies on himself. And so it was really a cool book where it talks about a lot of those kind of lessons. The last book is called Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus: Why We Get Resilience Wrong and the Surprising Science of Real Toughness. What's great about this book is it actually breaks down what it takes to do hard things. It's not just like, you ramp up your motivation. It's like all these little tactics and things. So one of the takeaways is embracing vulnerability. So this is kind of like accepting what is. Some things you're just not good at and embracing those weaknesses and your emotions and things like that helps you recognize that vulnerability can be a sense of strength. So you can use self-awareness to understand your limits and weaknesses and work on them constructively. Second takeaway is focusing on process, not outcome. So I do a lot of other videos that talk about this and setting up systems, etc. You have to have an outcome, right, to figure out where you're going. But once you figure out where you're going, you can only focus on the thing that's in front of you, which is what are you doing today? How are you moving forward today? So focusing on process, not outcome. And then the last is balancing stress and recovery. You know, unlike David Goggins and, you know, the Iron Cowboy and all these guys that are just pushing themselves to the absolute limits and, you know, learning that they're 40%. Steve talks about like stress is feedback, and getting recovery when you have that feedback is essential for avoiding burnout, right? And keeping resilience. And so when you're doing hard things, even if you're doing like an Ironman, it's like you can't go sprint an Ironman, right? You have to have a sort of a pace, and you might have to slow that pace down depending on what happens. And so you want to incorporate regular recovery periods into your routine. So these are some of the lessons from Do Hard Things. This is actually one of my favorite books because I've read it and listened to it a few times, because it just reminds me of just little things like, you know, get to the next light post when you're running, or do the next rep when you're lifting, or write the next word when you're writing. So if you are struggling with mindset, check out these 7 books. I would highly recommend listening to the audiobooks while you're out on a walk or a run. Get 2 things done at the same time. And do me a favor, if you like this video, please consider subscribing. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.